While we were in college, my friends and I had maybe the worst housemate to ever exist. For this story, I'll call her M. M started off relatively normal, mostly just being difficult to deal with when she was drinking. The problem was that M started getting drunk more and more often, and it was contributing to emotional and mental issues that were lying dormant, ready to explode. She had a lot to deal with, and while we were all unnerved by her destructive actions, we started off just feeling bad for her. We tried to keep her safe, and on many occasions we tried to get her the help that she needed, but her friends outside the house either enabled her or completely ignored her when she was blacked out, so it was always up to us to deal with the fallout. A lot of the things she did were either just funny or gross. Stuff like going into the kitchen and taking a bite out of a raw potato, or constantly peeing her bed in her sleep while guys were in it. As time went on, however, things started getting more annoying. After one friend made a beautifully glazed ham for Friendsgiving, Em went into the fridge while drunk and dropped the entire leftover ham on the floor. Another time, she threw her pea-soaked panties in the corner of the living room and left them there for a week. And then, there are the more disturbing things. We found out quickly that she was notoriously violent while drinking, which made her extremely hard to control. This led to actions like punching her best friend directly in the face and biting a guy so hard that he cried. The housemate that experienced the most of M's violence, however, was my friend Christine. M singled out Christine very early on as someone she didn't like and would always do the most dangerous things around her. One night, M was trying to cut her shoelaces with a kitchen knife because she couldn't untie them. When Christine tried to help her and tell her to just put the knife down, M threw it across the room at her. Another time, when it was just M, Christine, and Christine's boyfriend in the house, M tried to set her bed on fire while everyone else was asleep. She even stole Christine's boyfriend's phone one time and left terrifying voicemails on Christine's phone, sobbing and yelling gibberish. For a while, though, it seemed like maybe M was going to get better. She had actually been getting some help, and we went a good while without any incidents. But then, about 4 months before our lease was up, she got into an argument about parking with Christine's boyfriend, who lived across the hall from us. It was a small, meaningless argument, but because we didn't immediately take her side, she decided that from that point on, she was going to completely shun the entire household. This began a spiral back into her drinking and into her anger and emotional issues, and because it had all started with Christine's boyfriend, of course Christine was the one who attracted the most of her hate. All of this culminated in a night I will never forget. It was about 2 weeks to the end of our lease, and we were all so relieved to be getting out of that apartment. Em had been staying in her room almost exclusively, and her sister was visiting and keeping her busy, so we all kind of let our guard down. It was Friday, and everyone in the house had plans to go out that night except for Christine, who had a final the next day. Another one of our housemates and I were at a party several blocks away from our apartment when I got a call from Christine at around 1 a.m. I walked out of the party where it was quieter and answered the call. Christine's tone was confused and concerned. "I think something's happening," she said. "What do you mean?" I answered. I was already nervous because Christine isn't the type to worry needlessly. "I think Em and her sister are fighting. They were out and Em got drunk. I'm in my room. I can hear yelling, but it sounds like it's getting physical." I knew Christine wouldn't have called me if it wasn't a big deal, so I figured I needed to do something. I asked Christine if she was okay and if I should call the police or come home, but she said she wasn't sure. She was tired and mostly concerned about getting enough sleep at this point. I was thinking about how we should handle the situation when suddenly I heard commotion on the line. I heard a bang and some shouting. Christine's voice had gone silent. Then another bang, and then Christine's voice was back on the line. She told me that Em had just burst into her room, glaring at her in a rage, and then Em's sister had yanked her from the room and shut the door once again. They were definitely in a physical struggle. Christine was keeping me up to date on what she was hearing, while I was growing more and more concerned for her safety. She told me that there was a huge thump, and it sounded like M's sister had just body-slammed M into the wall to subdue her. Meanwhile, M was screaming bloody murder and saying things like, "I just want to die. Just let me die. I hate you." I was already about to start walking home when suddenly Christine went unnervingly silent. "What is it? What's happening?" I asked. Christine paused for another moment, listening. Then she said, "Oh my God. I think it happened. I think someone got stabbed." I felt chilled to the bone when I heard this. "What do you mean? What do you hear?" I asked frantically. I heard the knife drawer open. I think M went for the knife. Someone's crying really softly. I can only hear one voice." I basically started sprinting back home. I told Christine to stay in her room and that I would call the police and meet them outside the apartment. I was shaking as I called them. Not only was there possibly a severely injured person in the house, but if M really did have the kitchen knife, then I was seriously worried for Christine being in there alone. The police came right away, and I watched from outside as multiple officers dragged a screaming and struggling M from the apartment, looking completely unhinged. It took an officer practically slamming her against the police car to subdue her enough to be cuffed. When I entered the apartment, I was shocked and relieved to find M's sister alive and miraculously not bleeding except for her hand, which M had stabbed with the barbecue fork we kept in the kitchen drawer. It just so happened that earlier that day, M had used the kitchen knife and left it in the sink instead of it in its usual place in the drawer. When she went to grab a weapon, she could only find the barbecue fork. The police took statements from everyone in the house, and Christine and I made it very clear that this was not M's first instance of violence. M's sister was in complete shock. She had no idea that M acted like this when she was drunk or that she struggled with so many personal demons. My housemates and I were all positive that M would be institutionalized. Imagine our shock when M and her sister entered the apartment a few days later. Apparently, M's sister had undermined the severity of their fight and vouched for M's stability, causing her to be released. We were baffled, but it seemed like M had learned her lesson enough to avoid us as much as possible in the next few days before we moved out, lest we call the cops on her again. We got through the last week without any major incidents, and M moved out a day before the rest of us. Luckily, I had the privilege of never seeing her again. It was a harrowing experience living with her, and it's something that my friends and I will probably talk about for the rest of our lives. I'm just glad that all of us got through it without getting hurt. The scary part is, though, that there were so many times when one of us could have gotten hurt, especially that night when Em and her sister fought. The thing that sticks with me the most is how fortuitous it was that Em had grabbed the barbecue fork instead of her favorite kitchen knife that night. If the knife had been in its usual place in the drawer, I hate to think what might have happened to Em's sister, or my friend, Christine. This happened a few years ago in my hometown. I'm not going to say where to protect the privacy of my best friend, but everyone should be on the lookout for these types of situations as they are growing increasingly more common. My best friend in undergrad, we'll call her Em, and I were extremely close. We worked together, had the same degree, had the same hobbies, most of the same classes, the same friend group, and lived very near to each other. As a result, we were with each other very often, so very rarely alone. Keep this in mind as the story goes on. Em was picking up her cats from a friend's house and parked her car on the street outside. She put the cats in the car, ran to lock the front door, and came back. It took maybe 10 seconds to lock it and run back, but she didn't lock her car. About halfway to her house, she realized that her purse containing makeup, hundreds of dollars, checks from work, her passport, all of her IDs and cards, and bills for her apartment with her address on them were missing from the passenger seat. She had been running errands to prepare for a trip to her hometown, which is why she had all of these things with her. Pulling over, she looked at her bank account online to see someone had already tried to use the card at a gas station 5 minutes away, so she canceled her card and drove home. When telling me the story, I pointed out that whoever took her purse was so fast that They had to have been watching her, and she agreed. She reported it all to the police, but wasn't expecting anything to come from it, as we lived in an area notorious for theft at the time. A month or so later, she received a phone call from a detective saying that they had found all of her items except the cash. Em told the detective it was fine as she already had new ones. The detective paused for a moment and then told Em that they would not be returning her items at all as they were now evidence in an investigation. When Em asked what she meant, the detective told her that they found all of her items with a woman who is known to be involved in human trafficking. The area where the woman was arrested is also a common route human traffickers take, and our state is one of the hotspots for trafficking in the U.S. Along with the stolen items, there were pictures of Em from several months prior walking around our college campus, and our work and hanging out with friends on her birthday. There are also photos of her friends and other girls that we didn't know. These people had her hometown address, her address in the state where we lived, where we worked, the places we ate and hung out, her university ID card, knew she had animals and where she walked them, where she did her banking, what kind of car she drove, and who her friends were. Naturally, her boyfriend, who was in the military, lost it and had his friends sit outside the house when he wasn't home and escort her to and from work at night for the next few months. It didn't seem like I was a target, but I still had my boyfriend use my car to drive me to and from work for a while, and I bought pepper spray for my keychain. In the aftermath of finding this out, we realized a few things. Despite being followed at fairly close range, somehow neither of us ever noticed somebody following us, probably because the person was a woman. Most of the opportunities for someone to take her, such as walking to her car or house at night, were probably missed because either her boyfriend or I were with her. They must have been learning the schedules of everyone around her as well to see when there were times she was truly alone. Since they already knew so much about her before stealing all of her information, there must be a big boss somewhere who has at least some information about her, including what she looks like. The one thing they didn't seem to have photos of were her hiking with her dogs. Either they didn't know she hiked, often alone, or they were worried it would be too obvious if someone were to follow her, thus tipping her off, and perhaps the most terrifying, if they decided after all this time to make a move and steal her things, they must have been planning to do something big fairly soon. It's likely they took her IDs in order to make fake ones to get her out of the country undetected. Unfortunately, I can't give an update as nothing ever happened after the arrest, and every time she asks about the case, the detective says it's an active investigation and they can't disclose any information. We've never actually seen the photos either. All the explanation was done over the phone. It's been 3 years since all this happened, and even though we've moved past it, it still terrifies me to think about what would have happened if they hadn't found that woman. I urge everyone to be aware of their surroundings. Be wary of anyone following you, not just men. Stay with your friends, check in on them to see if they made it home safe, and always, always lock your doors. Allow me to give some information about me before we get into the story. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and I'm a little alternative looking, I guess. I have long black hair with a bright green fringe. I have my septum and my medusa pierced. I'm heavily tattooed, and I dress in a rather gothic fashion. I also live in the middle of nowhere where my house is big and looks like something from a horror movie, but I love it. And now to the story. It's a long one, so please bear with me. This happened when I was 20. I had just moved into a big old spooky house against my parents' wishes as they found the place too creepy, but that is exactly when I bought it. It was classed as a fixer-upper house, so I got it for quite cheap. As a moving-in present, my parents bought me a beautiful German Shepherd puppy. He was mainly to put my dad's mind at ease with me living out here by myself. He's gorgeous. He's also very special as he is also a chimera. If you don't know what that means, it's when two morphs mold together into one beautiful animal. His dad was a black German Shepherd, and his mother was a pure white one, so he was split directly down the middle with one black eye and one blue eye. Safe to say, he is my pride and joy, and I love him so much. His name is Cobalt, by the way. I had been living in this house for a few months at the time this happened. Cobalt, like most pups, grew up fast, and he was super playful, and like most puppies, he needs a lot of walking, and as I work from home, I have a lot of time to do that. I hadn't really had a chance to get to know my neighbors. As I have mentioned already, I live in the middle of nowhere, so I don't really have any neighbors besides the trees. There's a few houses a few miles down the road, an elderly couple who are lovely who I've gotten to know very well over the years, and a young man who we'll call Max for this story. Max was quite creepy when he first came around to say hi, and was thrilled when he found out I was on my own. And he came around quite a lot until he found out I had a girlfriend, and then he got really possessive, and one night while my girlfriend was over, he came around and demanded to know who she was and why she was in his girl's house. He made it apparent he hated my girlfriend and wanted her out of my life. He also hated my dog, and Cobalt always growled at him, so I guess the feeling was mutual. So on this day, I got ready for a run and packed my backpack with everything we would need, and we began our run. So we were running when I suddenly felt like we were being watched, but I just brushed it off and carried on running, but the feeling was always at the back of my mind. After about an hour and a half of running, we headed back to the house. The closer we got to my house, the more uneasy I began to feel. I felt quite sick and unsafe, so we sprinted back into my house and locked all my doors and windows and closed the blinds to make sure no one could see in. I had a quick shower with Cobalt waiting at the door for me as he always did. Once I got out, I picked up my cell phone and called my girlfriend to see if she could come over. My girlfriend is 6'3" easily. She works as a bouncer and is heavily tattooed, so she comes across as intimidating, but once you get to know her, she's super friendly. Thankfully, she said she could come over, and she began the long hour drive to my house. She had to wait for the lease in her apartment to end before she could move in with me. She had a key, so I waited for her to come in before going to bed, and she checked every inch of my house before we went to bed. I felt safer with her and Cobalt around. Cobalt was at the end of the bed. I felt so uneasy. It was about 3 a.m. when we were awoken by Cobalt growling on the landing at something downstairs. All of his hairs were stood up. Suddenly, without warning, he shot down the stairs barking, and that was met with a blood-curdling scream. We both shot up and ran down the stairs. Cobalt was lying down next to a limp figure on the floor, holding his arm in his mouth to keep it in place. Considering Cobalt is still only a puppy, he was super strong and knew he needed to protect. My girlfriend ran down the stairs first and turned on the lights. There on the floor was a guy with a potato sack over his head, lying on his tummy, with his arm in my dog's mouth, and next to my dog is what looked to be a baseball bat lying on the floor. My girlfriend quickly grabbed the guy's hands behind his back and ripped the sack off of his head to reveal it was Max. He started screaming, telling my girlfriend he was going to be my husband one day and how he needed to get her out of the way and my stupid dog. Cobalt was still close to my girlfriend just in case Max tried anything while the police were on their way. Max was charged with breaking and entering. I don't know what his plan was because he didn't know my girlfriend was over. Her car had broken down, so she walked and got a tow truck to pick her car up. I don't know what his intentions were. I don't wish to know, but all I know is it would have been really bad if Cobalt hadn't been there. I'm so thankful for my dog, and he will always be my hero. The year was 1977, and I was 14 years old. I used to live with my mom, dad, and my sister in a house. We live in a city called Colares in Brazil. My dad used to work as a construction worker in the city, and he also had a corn farm away from there. The city was small, had a little more than 1,000 people. We used to go to the school by morning, and the school was inside the church. We would go out and play with my friends during the afternoon, and we would still be playing until night. There were other small villages around, and the kids from these villages would join us too. It all started mid-August. Me and 5 of my friends were walking in a region we called the beach. The beach was a place somewhat far away from the city, surrounded by woods. We used to go there sometimes. We would start a fire and sit around it to tell each other stories. We had some dogs with us that day. All of a sudden, we started to smell something strange. It was like this weird chemical smell. The dogs then started to bark in the direction of the woods. We all looked at the tree line, trying to see something. Me and one of my friends stood up, and we got 2 big sticks we would leave around the place for emergencies. The dogs got more and more agitated. We then saw some movement in the woods. The dogs ran in the direction of the movement, and before we could do anything, they disappeared in the darkness. We tried following them, but they were too fast, and their barks would get more and more distant. The noises then stopped. We kept running. We eventually found the dogs, all dead. They all had that chemical smell, and one of them had this weird transparent goo in his mouth. They also didn't have any injuries. I remember that I cried a lot that night. One of the dogs was mine, and I really liked him. Some weeks later, everything was normal. I was at my house sleeping. I woke up in the middle of the night. I heard 2 or 3 cars accelerating through the road in front of my house. I found it a bit weird, but thought nothing more of it. I went to sleep again. That morning, I got ready for school. As soon as I opened the door, 2 of my friends were waiting for me. They started telling me what happened during the night. Apparently, one of the villages got attacked by some sort of light. I didn't believe them at first. However, when we went by the only clinic in town, there were more people than usual in front of it. One girl was sitting in front of the clinic crying. We knew that girl. She would sometimes play with us, and she was from another village. We quickly went to her and asked what happened. She then told us a story that gave me goosebumps. Apparently, everything was okay until 11 p.m. The people of her house were at the living room talking. Suddenly, they hear some commotion outside. As they went to see, there were some people pointing at the skies, so they looked up as well. She said they could see some weird lights in the sky. They were almost round and would illuminate some of the clouds near it. She got scared and decided to go back home. As she was getting back, a huge flash of light illuminated the village. She ran inside and hid, meanwhile listening to people screaming outside. The flashes would continue and a buzz sound would fill the air, then it finally stopped. She heard her dad coming inside with her mom, both in pain. After that, some of the people from the village went around to check on everyone. Her mom and dad were vomiting in the living room when the people came. They got everyone inside a car and took them to the hospital. That story scared me and my friends. We all got to school later and all of our friends looked weirded out as well. A quick question and they told us they knew about what had happened too. We had classes with the priest as normal and later we went home. After lunch, me and my friends decided to go around a bit. You could see a change in the atmosphere of the town. People were scared about what happened. We then went to the beach again, me and my friends, and as we used to do, we stayed there until night. The moon was illuminating the sky and reflecting on the river. Then we heard a weird noise over in the distance. Suddenly, a big shadow covers the moon. When we looked up, we couldn't move from so much fear. Right on top of us, there was this black thing, a huge, dark ellipsoid with lights under it. It was big and standing still on top of us. One of my friends screamed, and we started running into the woods. We hid ourselves into a sort of cave, unaware if the thing was really after us, and we stood there for a while. After we decided it was safe, we went running into town again. As soon as we got next to it, we could hear something was wrong, as we could hear screams in the distance. As we got to it, some people were crying and screaming in the streets. I quickly ran to my house. As I got there, my dad was going out of my house holding my mom. I immediately helped him carrying my mother, who was crying in pain. We went to the hospital. When we got there, a lot more people were there too. The one medic was running side to side trying to calm people down. In the light of the hospital, I could talk to my dad about what happened. He said that they heard a noise outside and stayed inside in fear. People could see the light in the sky again. When the flashes started, they were inside. Apparently a flash came from a hole in the roof and got to my mom. Where the flash hit her, there were 2 needle-like holes. The area where the flash just hit was marked and had black marks in it. As more people would come in, I would hear around people talking about the injuries. Apparently the injuries were almost exact to each other. Even the people who got totally exposed by the flashes, all they had were 2 needle-like holes and some black marks. When it was finally dawn, my father gathered some friends and they went to the mayor's house. It was at this point in the hospital that I heard the name for the first time. They were calling these flashes the chupa chupa, suck suck in English, because some people reported that the light was sucking blood from them. The days passed and more places started reporting the incident. People would light big bonfires at the main square in fear of the flashes. Then the military arrived and they set up camp near the town. I had seen guns before, but nothing quite like that. They had this big anti-air gun. It was installed in the middle of the base. This didn't stop the things from happening. Every day more and more people were attacked. The feeling of hopelessness finally made a good part of my town to move away, and me and my family went to a village at around 40 kilometers from the city. We had a small farm there where my dad used to grow corn. We thought we would be safe there, and I had to quit school because of the whole deal. So my routine through the day was I would help my dad during the day, and I would hang out with some friends from the neighborhood later. Things were pretty calm for a week, until one day, when the lights came, I was at home with my parents and we had to hide from the flashes under a big table in the kitchen. Some of the other families weren't so lucky and got hit by them. My dad took it upon himself to take some people to Colares Hospital. The next day, he didn't come home. I tended to the farm as usual, waiting for him to come back. Later, I got on my bicycle and went to hang around with the other kids. We went pretty far from town. When it was almost dark, we were already gone back, and I saw my dad's car back through the road. He didn't stop, as we were all going back together, me and the other kids. The thing is, all of the kids would go home and I would have to ride another 12 minutes until I got home. It was dark already and I was alone about halfway home. Then, I saw the lights in the sky and the flashes started. This time, as I was riding my bicycle, I didn't have a single space to hide from the flashes. As soon as the first flash hit me, I fell to the ground, paralyzed. I couldn't move nor scream, and I felt the pain of the flashes scorching my skin. When the lights stopped, I got up. 2 holes were open near my neck, and I had black marks all over me. I went home, stumbled here and there from the pain. That was about the last straw for my father. He got me in the car and went to the hospital with me. There, at least 3 more people were waiting, all victims of the flashes. All the family had to stay in the church while they waited for me to get treated. I spent the next day in the hospital as I had more wounds from the bicycle fall. At that night, we heard strange noises while in the hospital. It all started with a weird buzz. I recognized it from that day at the beach and started crying. Suddenly, another noise. A helicopter. It went by the city really fast. Sometime later, a loud noise. I never heard an anti-air gun before, but from the noise, I knew it was that thing firing at something. Then, everything got quiet. We went back to the farm the next day. We could see the remaining people of the town were all on edge for what happened the other day. At this point, it was at the end of February. About a week later, the military went back to the capital. For some time in the next months, we would still see the lights, but the flashes that used to hurt us were gone. The town went back to normal then. So I grew up in this town, and in 1989 my dad passed away. I then went to live in the corn farm, in the small house we had there. The house wasn't big, but it had everything I needed. I used to tend to the crops during the day and made a chicken coop. One night I was almost asleep, but suddenly the dogs started barking outside. I had these big dogs for protection. I stood up from my bed, got my gun, and went to check outside. I could hear something moving on the cornfield. As I got outside, I started to smell something weird, a chemical smell. I stood outside in the front door looking at the movement in the cornfield. Something then blocks the light of the moon. I look up. I see the same black shape I had seen years ago. When I look back down again, I could see a thing, a small humanoid figure, thin, about 1.5 meters tall. It had brownish pale skin, a big head, big bulgy black eyes. When I looked at it, I felt a strong headache. I twisted myself and managed to get inside my house and close the door. I was so scared I even ended up peeing myself. I then sat at the corner of the living room, gun pointed at the door. The dogs kept barking outside. I saw shadows passing in the front of the window, but I refused to look at them. I stood there until I could see the light of the moon again and the smell disappeared. I got up, ran to my car, and drove all the way to my sister's house at the Capitol. I went back there to get my stuff, but I would never live near that region again. A friend of mine still lives there. He says that from time to time, he can still see the lights in the sky. When I met Alan Morse more than 4 years ago, I had just started working at this small family-styled restaurant as a cook in Greenville, Michigan. One of the two owners used to be a manager at one of the McDonald's in town years before, where both my older sisters had worked, and so she knew me pretty well. I never had a problem with Alan, as he always treated me and everyone else with respect. He mostly kept to himself, but did every now and then open up to us all as if he was having a good day. Alan did not hide the fact that he had a lengthy criminal record and had been incarcerated for many years before coming to the restaurant, where he would work very hard. He had a new girlfriend who had a kid that Alan loved very much and was trying to start his life over as best he could. One day, Alan called in and said that he wasn't feeling very well, which we all believed, as to us he was a pretty trustworthy guy. He started taking more time off and started to call in quite frequently. I usually helped to close the restaurant at night and only worked 4-hour shifts, but every so often my boss would schedule me to work a morning shift. So when I saw that I was scheduled to work with Alan the following morning, I was pretty happy. I arrived and immediately said hello to Alan. Usually to this he would respond with a grin and hello back, but didn't say anything. I said it again, nothing. He was standing by one of the flat-top grills, just staring off into space. I walked over to him and said hello for a third time while touching his shoulder. He jumped and looked startled. I apologized, but he laughed it off as nothing and said that he was just tired. We had a great shift and left around the same time that day, just as the afternoon crew had come in to relieve us. It had been a few days before I worked again, and when I came in to start my shift, everyone was acting odd. So I asked one of the other cooks what was going on. She said that Alan was arrested. Amazed, I asked for what reason. She stated for suspected break-ins in the Stanton, Michigan area. There had been many robberies that had happened in the Stanton area that went on for many weeks. The other cook that was with us told me that the police had believed it had all been Alan the entire time. We were all shocked, as Alan had appeared to be doing so well that the thought of him going back to crime and then jail didn't seem real. I would like to say that this is where my story ends, but it doesn't. Some time goes on with no news of Alan. He could have still been in jail for all we knew, or laying low somewhere, until one day when he walked through the back door of the restaurant with a big smile on his face. The two other cooks on the shift with me and the owners all greeted Alan and asked how he was doing. He said that he was fine and that he was just getting some things in order, and said that he would be returning to work very soon. Months go by and everything with Alan is normal, until he just stops showing up to work altogether. We were told that he was in trouble with the law again. One day I get a text from one of my coworkers with an article attached that says, "Man arrested in elderly Montcalm County man's murder," with a picture of Alan's mugshot attached to the article. The man had been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber round in his home between March 27th and March 30th, 2015. The morning that Alan was acting weird made more sense to me now. That morning shift was during the time that the man was murdered. I could have even worked with him the day after he committed this heinous crime, but I'll never know. They had suspected Alan because this was the same area that all of the break-ins and robberies had taken place, one of the break-ins being just 2 houses down from the man that was killed. Alan broke into the home not knowing that the man was there, as he had thought he had left the house. The man was sleeping and woke up to find Alan. I am sure Alan ended the man's life because he didn't want the cops called and the break-in reported. When the man was found, the police noted that there were several missing firearms from the house and his cell phone had been taken as well. Alan was convicted of murder of an 80-year-old Dale Nelson and was sentenced to 26 to 75 years behind bars. It was later found out that Alan stored many of the belongings he stole not only from Dale Nelson's house but others as well, in the shed that was owned by the restaurant that we had worked at together. The shed was on the other side of the parking lot and rarely used, so it was a good hiding place. Alan was also in possession of owning some lewd child pictures and the tools that he had used to break into the house. It goes to show you that you never truly know who you were working with. This happened years ago when I was around 14, and 27 now. I might butcher the story since it had been 13 years or so ago, but it was 100% true. My family and I were down in Mexico visiting family during the Christmas holiday. On this day, my aunt and cousin Susie, who was around 19, came over to our house. My aunt wanted to talk to my mom about something. Can't remember what, but my younger sister, Nell, who was around 4, wanted to go with Susie to play. Susie told my mom that it would be fine. She could look after Nell while we did whatever we were doing. Don't remember what we were doing. I think cleaning out the storage area or something. Mom agreed and told Susie my siblings and I would pick her up before 7, and that's when the nightly prayers began. Around 7 o'clock, my siblings and I went over to Susie's house to pick up Nell. When we arrived to her house, we spotted them playing near the street on top of an old truck. Susie saw us and looked really relieved to see us. "I'm so glad to see you here. Craziest thing happened," Susie told us. "What happened, and why were you outside?" Lynn, my eldest sister, asked her. Soon Susie told us what happened. When they arrived hours ago, Susie took Nell to her room to play with old dolls she had. They were having fun and everything was going great, until Nell shushed Susie. "Why are you shushing me?" Susie whispered. "Carrie's over there, and she isn't happy." Nell whispered, pointing at Susie's closet. Carrie is Susie's older sister, and she was out of town at that time, which Susie told Nell. Nell shook her head and pointed at the closet again. "Carrie's angry. She wants to hurt us." Susie was starting to get spooked and looked at her closet. Her closet at the time didn't have a door but a semi-transparent curtain. She didn't see anything and asked Nell what Carrie was doing. "She's watching us. Susie, she's coming," Nell whispered, now hugging Susie's arm. Susie wasn't sure if she imagined it or actually saw it, but she saw a hand appear in the closet and was starting to push the curtain aside. Susie grabbed Nell and ran downstairs. Trying to calm herself down, she put a movie on for Nell to keep her distracted and went back upstairs to her room. The moment she got to the top landing, she saw her bedroom door was closed. She knew she didn't close it, and it would make a loud noise when it closed since it was made of metal. She didn't know what else to do, so she placed a chair in front of the door and hurried downstairs and joined Nell. Once the movie was over, Susie asked Nell what else she wants to do, but once again Nell shushed her and pointed at the stairs. "Carrie is angry at you. She's coming." Susie grabbed Nell and dragged her out of the house, out on the street, and that's when we showed up. We were kind of spooked by the story, and Susie was just happy we were there. "I'm sure it's nothing. Maybe just an act of imagination," Jess, my older sister, said. Susie shrugged, still a bit shaken when Nell shushed us all. "Carrie is watching," Nell whispered, pointing at the second-floor window. That's when we all booked it and ran toward the church, where my aunt was cleaning. We haven't told my aunt or our parents what had happened, probably thinking we just got spooked by a 4-year-old until 5 years ago. Jess randomly brought up that day and told my mom about it, laughing it off as our imaginations running wild. "Did this ghost look like Carrie?" my mom asked. A shiver went down our spines. We haven't mentioned that part to her. "Did the ghost look like Carrie?" my mom asked. A shiver went down our spines. We haven't mentioned that part to her. "Did Susie tell you?" Jess asked. "No, because I know Susie's house is haunted. There's a ghost that looks like your cousin Carrie. I know because you mentioned this before when you were around 7. Do you and Lynn remember sleeping over at Susie's house?" "No. Why?" "Good. You forgot," was all my mom said and left it at that. That story's for another time, but now we know that my cousin's house is haunted and what my sister saw that day was an actual ghost. I live in a neighborhood. Well, it's more of a highway with houses at the side of the road. I wouldn't recommend walking since there's no sidewalks. I wish I gave myself that warning 2 years ago. I had some friends with me at the time, a boy and 2 girls. Let's call the boy Dan, and the girl will be called Sarah, and girl 2 will be called Hazel. We decided to make our little squad of explorers exploring forests and abandoned structures and such. Today is our first exploration, an abandoned house just at the very end of the neighborhood, so we start walking. We avoid the road by walking on the tall grass, which is very unpleasant, causing us to walk on the edge of the road. We reach the house. I looked up the house a year after, and it was built in the 1940s, owned by a man who abandoned it after having to live in the nursing home. This was the 80s, though, and the house had been left alone since. We were outside for a little while, and Dan says we should go inside. I was excited, but Sarah was not very happy. She sat on the moldy wood staircase and had to process everything before she went in. I can't blame her. What if there were squatters inside about to ambush us? We decided to check out the well. It was a stone round well which looked kind of like the well in The Ring. There was a piece of old wood covering the top, and Dan decided to be super reckless and stomped on the wood like a maniac. His leg fell through the small opening, and if he would have fell in, we would have been in big trouble. He lifted his leg out of the opening and acted like nothing just happened. I couldn't imagine. He almost fell down a well with what I saw were sharp rocks at the bottom, and he just brushed it off. Anyways, we got a little carried away and started throwing random stuff down the well. Figurines, rocks, fake flower pots, etc. We went inside the house. When we went inside, a very strong odor emitted from the door. It didn't just smell like old house. It smelled like a plumbing accident. It was very gross, but smells aside, we came across a bunch of weird things. Clothes packed in a freezer, a fireplace with dolls inside, an upside-down table, kind of looked like an art museum. We were very happy to find lots of vintage things inside of every cabinet and drawer. Things started to get kind of eerie. We entered the bedroom and the roof was caved in. Clothes with stains everywhere, and worst of all, a black ooze was lined across the ceiling. I was going to vomit at this point. We also heard some distinct chewing sound. We left the room and we froze. We saw a shadow at the corner of the door, but it was fast. It bolted back into the room it came from. We heard a huff, followed by a cough, which was enough for us to leave the house. But as the dumb kids we were, we stayed at the premises. A man who wore a scruffy-looking shirt with torn gym shorts opened the front door. We froze in shock. Who was there and how didn't we notice him? The mood turned from scary to horrific as he lifts his arm to reveal a chunk of raw meat of where his skin used to be, with the blood still dripping from it. We heard a neighbor shout, "Get out of here!" and we run for it. I haven't told my parents, but we'll plan to in the future. I don't want to be lectured at again for doing things that could have got me hurt, or hurt the people around me. I haven't heard anything about that house ever since, and I can't imagine what he would have done to us if we were caught. I practice Taekwondo in a stadium in my city. It's a dangerous place, but I have been living all my life there and nothing has happened to me, so normally I forget about the robs and drugs and all of that. One day I was chatting with a friend in the entrance of the stadium and there was a guy shirtless and with a lot of muscles. He was just standing in front of a wall reading something, so none of us care about him. Some minutes later we say goodbye and leave to different places. I decide to walk to my house. I live about 30 to 40 minutes away. Because I had time and was a nice day, so while I was walking, I saw the same guy from before. He was walking in the street and fighting with the drivers. All I thought was that he was on some drugs and just kept walking. About 10 minutes later, he disappeared. Some minutes passed and nothing happened. I was just listening to music and walking. But 20 minutes later, or more or less, the guy passed me. I was kind of shocked because he appeared from nowhere, but he passed me, so I thought I was being way too paranoid. Then he stands in the same cross I was, and he watched me. I felt weird and texted my mom that I was close to home and asked her to open the door. It's important to describe my house for this. I live in a 3rd floor, but it's not a normal building. There are houses in the ground level, with 2nd floor backyard and everything. In between 2 houses, there is a stair that lets you in the 3rd floor. There are more houses over the ones on the ground level, and I live on the 3rd. So when I get to the stairs, the door was open and my dog was waiting for me. So I sit on the floor and pet her. Then my mom was like, "Be careful, there's someone behind you. Move so he can pass." I reply with an okay, stand up and went to the stairs without looking back. We started walking to my door. I went inside my house and looked back. And there he was. The shirtless guy was behind me all along, and he just was standing outside of my house. My mom closed the door and freaked out. She asked me if I knew him, if he had talked to me or something. I looked at her confused, still shocked. She started calling my dad, loud enough so the guy outside could hear it. My dad didn't hear her, but that was enough. The guy finally left. This happened some months ago, but it still freaks me out. He saw me, and he followed me, and now he knows where I live. This took place between 2014 and 2015 when I was renting a small 2-bedroom house with my now ex-girlfriend in a fairly up-and-coming city in the UK. The house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was small and was laid out so that the kitchen and living room were open plan. There was no space for a dining room, but there was just about enough space under the stairs for a 4-person table. The neighborhood was only about 13 years old, and there is a beautiful park outside the front of the house with a nice open field where people would walk their dogs, jog, and have picnics. I didn't get any unsettling feelings about the house, nor did I feel that there was anything off. I'm usually sensitive towards these things. When I was younger, I used to see and hear things I couldn't explain. A man praying at the foot of my bed. A woman whispering my name while I laid in bed. But as I got older, these occurrences became more and more rare until they stopped altogether. Now, I don't get anything more than a feeling of being watched or a cold air wash over me. The only things remotely eerie about our new home was that the park next to the house is called the Roman Park, because of the ruins of an old Roman villa, which makes it a bit of a local attraction in the city I live in. After the first few months of moving in, everything was great. My girlfriend and I would get home, make dinner, watch TV, and go to bed. We had 2 cats who would often wake us up in the middle of the night because, as anyone with cats will tell you, cats only want your attention when you're not giving it to them. They would walk on our faces, knock things over, jump on the bed, and run up and down the stairs. It was almost comforting to know that they were there. Sometimes they would stand in the bedroom doorway and meow at us until we woke up. This is how they told us that they wanted to go outside. We didn't have a cat flap, so we had to let them in and out. One night, my girlfriend and I are watching TV when out of the corner of my eye to the left, I see something moving on the stairs. I turn to look and there is nothing there. I ignore it, thinking maybe it was a trick of the mind, but it happens again. I keep my attention focused on the stairs, trying to work out what caught my attention when my girlfriend says, "Did you also see that?" "Yeah," I said. It looked like someone was standing there. We get a little bit freaked out, and even more so when we realize that the cats are both fixated on the stairs as well. This is a little weird, and I get a bit creeped out, but we kind of shrug it off and carry on with the movie. A few nights go by and the same thing happens again. This time my girlfriend and I turn our heads at exactly the same time. "It looks like someone in a white dress," my girlfriend said to me. Instantly, I get goosebumps because now I know we saw the same thing. This becomes more and more frequent, and we decide that maybe we should try to ignore it or keep looking forward, but pay attention to what we see out of the corner of our eyes. Soon we started seeing this thing almost every day, multiple times a day and even in the early afternoon. In an effort to relieve our fears, we turn it into a bit of a joke. Our back door was a sliding door with small vents at the top. When the wind blew in a very particular direction and came in through the vents, they made a noise similar to a kazoo. We started referring this as a lonely party ghost, and that was the name we gave to the thing we kept seeing on the stairs. Anytime something went missing, lonely party ghosts, a weird unexplainable noise, lonely party ghosts. This helped us feel better, but I don't think it helped with whatever was in our house. As time went on, I would wake up in a sweat with my girlfriend standing on the other side of the room, lights on, looking absolutely terrified. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me I had been screaming. I'm usually a light sleeper, and I had never had an issue with night terrors or sleep talking, so this was very unusual for me. It started to become regular. I'd wake up, my girlfriend would have the light on, and she would tell me that I had been screaming bloody murder. I woke myself up once from screaming, but I couldn't remember what I had been dreaming about. As the screaming got worse, so did the frequency of lonely party ghost appearances. It started becoming clearer and more vivid. What started as a blur in the corner of our eyes had now become a fully formed figure that would stand in the doorway of our bedroom at night. When this first happened, I thought I was imagining it. Some sort of half-asleep dream spilling into the real world, except it stayed there, motionless, staring at us long after I was fully lucid. As you can imagine, this woke me up bloody quickly, but even in my wide-awake state, it was still there. More weird things happened after that. My girlfriend woke me up because I had punched her in my sleep. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. I would hear walking in the house and things being knocked over. My girlfriend heard it too, and it was keeping us awake. She then said to me, "Please put the cats outside," but when I went to look for them, they were nowhere. I opened the curtains which were covering the back sliding door, and there they were, sitting on the outside deck waiting to be let in. This sent chills down my arms, and I ran upstairs to tell her that they had been outside the whole time. The figure in the doorway started showing up more often, and no matter how many times we closed the bedroom door, it would slowly swing open. More often than not, it would be the cats, as the door lock wouldn't latch when you closed it, and all you had to do was give it a push to open it without turning the doorknob. Toward the end of our tenancy, my girlfriend wakes me up gently in the middle of the night by nudging me and whispering my name. I ask her what's wrong, and she tells me she thinks there's someone downstairs. We had made it a routine to leave the cats out at night, so we knew that any noises in the house were not caused by them. I don't know if that made us feel better or worse, but as we lay there in the dark and listened to someone going through our kitchen drawers, we were frozen in fear. I feel that it's my responsibility as the man of the house to go and investigate any potential burglary, so after taking a deep breath and mustering all the courage I could find, I go out of bed and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. I heard the noises getting louder as I approached. It sounded like someone had climbed through the kitchen window, over the sink, and was now going through our cupboards. Had I left the window open? We often did this when we were cooking to let some of the heat out of the house, but we always made sure that they were closed when we went to bed. I had an idea to take my phone and record video with a flashlight on it just in case I was attacked or hurt. That way my potential murderer would be caught on film. I took a step down the stairs, stopping and looking through the banister at the living room. The noises continued. I took another step. There was a creak as the wood beneath my foot took my weight. The noises stopped for a brief second before continuing. They were going through the glass cupboard now. I could hear the clicking of glasses being knocked against each other. I took a few more steps down and shone my phone's flashlight into the kitchen and the noises stopped. I looked around and couldn't see anything out of place. The kitchen windows were closed. The cupboard doors were closed. The curtains were dead still. There was no one there. I did a quick sweep of the house, ready to punch anyone I saw, but there wasn't anybody. I know that based on everything that has happened up until this point, I probably should have attributed this to lonely party ghosts, but honestly, it didn't even cross my mind. I heard a noise, thought we were being burgled, and was fully expecting to fight someone. I checked that all the windows and doors were locked, checked everywhere that someone could potentially hide, but I found nothing. My adrenaline was pumping so hard that I could hear my heart beating in my ears. I let out a short sigh of relief and went to the back door to let the cats in, but just then I noticed something on my phone screen, a bright light shining from the other side of the room. I looked at my phone, confused by what I was seeing. I looked up and couldn't see any light at all. The area where the light was coming from was a blank wall. When I looked back at my phone, it was still there. It was like an LED was being pointed at my phone. I've seen dust on camera, and while it can be reflective, this was not reflecting light. It was emitting it. It started to drift closer and closer to me, getting bigger and brighter, but I could still not see it with my naked eyes. Finally, it got within a few inches of my phone, hovered there for about 5 seconds before then drifting toward the kitchen and disappeared. I know that it wasn't a dust particle. I have seen that enough times to know that they don't emit light like that, nor do they drift so smoothly and with such purpose. I honestly feel that this thing walked across the room to me, stood right in front of me, and then walked back into the kitchen. I let the cats in and went upstairs to show my girlfriend the video. She was in shock when I showed her and explained what had happened, and I had shown a few people the video who all thought it was weird. Unfortunately, I have since lost the video, but I will never forget how big and bright that light was. We weren't in the house for much longer after that, but nothing too exciting happened really. We still heard noises, still saw things out of the corner of our eyes, and I'd wake up with scratches on my back. The house we moved into didn't have anything unusual happen, and it was a relief to live somewhere where I didn't constantly feel eyes on me. Do you think that a new house can be haunted if it's on old land? What do you think was in my house? Why did we see a woman in a dress on the stairs but a shadow in the doorway? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And be sure to check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.